What's going on YouTube? I am dukedobbins FTW and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's Overwatchaholics Anonymous meeting. I'm proud to say that as of now, I have been clean off of Overwatch for 2 hours. It was hard, but I'm just taking it 1 minute at a time. Thank you. Today I wanted to talk about Overwatch. You may have heard this game recently hit the 20 million registered users mark, which is pretty impressive for a brand new IP only 6 months out. To put that in perspective, it took Destiny a full year to hit that same number, and keep in mind, Overwatch launched with only a multiplayer mode and outside of the big Christmas season window that publishers love so much. So you have to wonder what an Overwatch 2 might look like if it released in November with a full PvE mode to boot. This is one of the biggest shooters on the market right now, and if it continues to grow at this pace, it will be the biggest shooter on the market next year. So I thought it would be worth looking at what this game gets right, what impact it might have on the genre as a whole, and what kind of gamer it's really meant for. Overwatch's popularity has been driven by a few key factors, the first and most important of which is its ability to remain easily accessible to new players while retaining a very high skill gap for veterans to explore. I'd compare Overwatch to something like soccer. The concept of putting the ball in the net using only your feet is something pretty much anyone can grasp. And people of all different ages and intelligence levels can easily play a pickup game of soccer without any previous training or real instruction. But for the people who really get into it, there's a whole deeper level of skill, the footwork and bending the ball and hitting the shit with your head and knowing who to pass to and when. It's easy to pick up and still very difficult to master. Overwatch is the same way. It has very simple, easy to memorize maps. It's the simplest spawn system in gaming. You never have to try and predict where motherfuckers are gonna spawn, and you always know what direction the enemy is generally coming from. It doesn't usually require much effort to find the enemy, and the objectives are very simple concepts. And just as important, the map design is very simplistic. All objects are very big, and the enemies are always very easy to see. Something important you need to understand about game design is that multiple stimuli present in the visual field at the same time compete for neural representation by mutually suppressing their evoked activity throughout the visual cortex, providing a neural correlate for the limited processing capacity of the visual system. Or, to put it more simply, when your environment is cluttered, the chaos restricts your ability to focus. The clutter also limits your brain's ability to process information. Clutter makes you distracted and unable to process information as well as you do in an uncluttered, organized, and serene environment. Alright, so this comes from a study conducted by the Princeton University of Neuroscience Institute. They actually used MRI scans to look at people's brain activity, and they found that the more visual disorganization present in your field of view, the harder it was to concentrate, process information, and make decisions, because each individual object and piece of clutter is competing for your brain's attention and using up more and more mental energy. They compared it to trying to work or focus on something while a toddler is right next to you, nagging you about candy or something, right? Like, candy, I want candy. Imagine someone shouting that in your ear while you're trying to do some other mental task. It's distracting. You can still do the mental task, but you're a little more irritable, you're more prone to making a mistake, you're more prone to getting distracted and missing something by the kid begging for candy, right? So the disorganization visually for your eyes is a distraction. You can ignore it, but it requires significant amounts of brain power. It's harder to concentrate and you're more prone to irritability. If you've ever known someone who prefers a clean house, right, an organized person, probably most of us have had at least one parent like this. If you ever ask them why they prefer shit clean and organized, one of the most common responses you'll get is, and I quote, "It just feels better. It feels good." Which is their way of saying their brain doesn't like the clutter because it's taxing their mental energy and making them more irritable. And I know this is true because even as someone who doesn't give a fuck about cleanliness or organization, I recognize that when I walk into the house, after it's been dirty for hella days, and suddenly it's super clean, neat, and organized, it does feel good. It's a very subtle thing, but it's there. It's like a small relief, like an ah. Now for me, it's never been worth the actual Vietnam style effort it takes to fucking clean, but when someone else does it, I'm like, oh, that's pleasant, So their work revolved largely around IRL clutter on your desk and shit. But I think this applies to games, and I think developers know it. Because visually, for your brain, what's the difference between clutter around your screen and clutter on your screen? This is why I suspect Call of Duty over the years abandoned the highly detailed, immersive, asymmetrical landscapes of COD 4, for instance, in favor of perfectly symmetrical, 3-lane maps with cartoon graphics, right? So if you look at Overwatch, the maps are simple. Every object is very big. There's never any clutter, no rubble or mounds of dirt in the ground or shitty little bushes, okay? They use a limited amount of colors on one object at a time, and the enemies are always very visible. And we talk about 3-lane maps in Call of Duty. A lot of Overwatch maps are 1 lane, you know what I mean? With a few little flanking routes here and there. Small little routes, not really big, not really a lane, but just a little, pathway from, around the lane. Now you can compare all this to a game like Battlefield, for instance, which is not at all easily accessible to someone trying the game for the first time. First of all, it's going to take some time and a whole lot of death before you even learn the maps, because they're so big and so detailed, and there are so many different lanes and rushing routes and power positions. It's going to be a long time before you learn the spawns and how to properly play the objective, and of course finding the enemies, predicting their movements, and remaining vigilant for campers and snipers. It's a constant, mentally taxing activity. There's a lot to learn before you can really even get into it competently. And the clutter is fucking real. The dirt on the ground is going to have many different pixel shadings. It's a very real, highly detailed, immersive environment with lots of rubble and piles of dirt and bricks. The dirt on the ground by itself is going to have many different pixel shadings, a lot of very small and still highly detailed objects, and you have to be paying very close attention to all these small details all the time, because it's very likely that one of those, little details turns out to be a head poking out of the dirt a mile away, about to one-shot you, right? So it requires much more mental processing power, making it that much harder, on top of the fact that the mechanics are harder to learn, the maps are harder to memorize, so on and so forth. Battlefield would be kind of like American football. You got to learn a whole lot before you can play in a game competently. You got to memorize plays, positions, an absurd amount of rules, proper tackling forms so you don't break your fucking neck. There's a bunch of equipment you got to use. It's not something a bunch of 10-year-olds can just go out and do casually at lunch, They could do the simplified, 2-touch 6v6 passing league without all the plays and no run game and shit, and that would be like the real life equivalent of COD. So it comes down to how low is the barrier to entry and how high is the skill ceiling. Some games like COD have low barriers to entry, low skill ceilings, and it's a very easily accessible game, but lacking a lot of depth for veteran gamers. Then there's Battlefield, high skill ceiling, but also pretty high skill floor that turns off many newcomers. And then some games like fucking StarCraft are like gymnastics, with stupidly high skill floors and ceilings. You gotta be able to do all kinds of crazy flips and shit just to even be considered a gymnast, right? The brilliance of Overwatch is being able to have that low skill floor and barrier to entry while retaining a very, very high skill ceiling. That ceiling being defined by mastering your character's abilities and their usefulness in various situations, understanding how to counter other characters' moves, knowing which abilities and ults combo well together, and recognizing when a combo opportunity arises. And of course, there's a massive skill gap when it comes to your aim with almost every character, your McCree, Soldier, Zarya, Zenyatta, Hanzo, etc., etc. So it's like soccer in that a lot of the skill gap is based around your individual abilities, like footwork or pass strategy, right? And this means that as long as you're playing someone that's generally in your same skill bracket, the game shouldn't be too intimidating or too difficult to get into, even for the first time. And of course, those individual abilities are the second big thing this game has to offer that no other game really does. One of the important lessons I think the FPS genre should take away from Overwatch is that less can be more. In the last 7 years I've spent playing shooter titles, every new FPS that comes out has to have two things: universal sprint and class customization. Every shooter, Battlefield, COD, Titanfall, Halo, whatever. But there's a downside to this obsession, and that is that as fun as sprint and class customization are, they restrict access to a lot of other really fun game mechanics, and Overwatch is the perfect example. I've talked about before how games are kind of like big boxes of toys, and the question is, how many toys are there and how fun are they to play with? Overwatch is the all-time fucking toy box. The mechanics you get to fuck around with in this game are unmatched. Things like Reinhardt's Shield, Tracer's Rewind, Mei's Wall, and freezing people, Roadhog's Chains, Zarya's Bubbles, Genji, and Winston's Electric Gun. These, and the many more I don't even have time to mention, are incredibly fun FPS game mechanics to play with, all the more so because most of them haven't ever been done in any other FPS before. The LMGs, SMGs, ARs, semi-autos, and every other shooter the last 7 years have had some minor variations. Okay, this gun has the advantage close quarters, this gun reloads a little faster, this one has a bigger clip, etc., etc. So you could customize your abilities, but they never offered the same diversity in your actual gameplay experience. You would point and shoot, and hopefully faster than the bad guy points and shoots at you. And that toy, the generic gun, basically gave you the same experience across weapon classes in a game, across the game sequels, and across entire different franchises. It was the same toy, sometimes painted differently, and the replay value of any new shooter was nerfed right out the gate because at least half the mechanics in it had already been used in every other shooter. Because when you have sprint and class customization, the rest of the game, and with the weapons especially, have to be designed to accommodate that shit. And it leaves developers a lot less wiggle room in terms of what new mechanics to put in and stuff like that. The reason Overwatch is able to include all these awesome game mechanics is because it made a bold move and completely removed class customization and sprint, with the exception of Soldier, for whose sprint is one of his powers, obviously. But if every character could sprint the way you can in any other FPS, a lot of the character abilities would be way overpowered and probably ultimately removed from the game. If characters like Reinhardt, Reaper, Mei, or Bastion could sprint, the hammer, the shotties, the ice spray, and the turret form would be overpowered to a game-breaking extent. and you wouldn't be able to play with those super fun toys anymore. They wouldn't be able to exist in the game. And if you had any class customization, none of the super fun game mechanics in this game would work, because it would just be stupid chaos. Imagine if Bastion could summon his own Reinhardt shield, or if Mei could teleport, or if Reinhardt could rewind, or if Soldier could Zarya bubble himself, or if fucking Tracers had Reaper shotguns, or if Reaper could fucking rewind. You know, in order to accommodate class customization, they would have to nerf the shit out of every game mechanic and ruin every super fun and unique toy you get to play with in this game. So that's kind of what I mean by less is more. By excluding sprint and class customization, Overwatch is able to offer experiences that other games can't. And it's not that sprint and customization don't have their place in gaming, but for a while, I felt like every shooter tries to shoehorn that shit into their game just for the sake of having it, even if it doesn't necessarily complement the game format itself. And obviously, Halo is the best example of that, but it's not the only one. And so I'm happy that Overwatch was able to prove that a shooter doesn't have to have that shit in order to be successful. And using all of these powerful and unique game mechanics, Overwatch is able to provide a supercharged, steroid shooter combat experience that is unrivaled by any other modern arena shooter. The excitement and intensity when Mei's walling off Zarya from her team after she got Roadhog chained in, but she has her bubble up to buy some time, the Mei wall is busted and Reinhardt does a charge through and pins an Ana, but then your Zarya bubbles the Ana, who survives and puts the Reinhardt to sleep. The enemy Mercy is beaming health into his ass. Our Genji wall climbs over to go try and pick her from behind, but the enemy Roadhog chain hooks the Genji, but misses the shot. Genji's in deep shit. In comes a Reaper roll out of nowhere. Mercy gets the triple res. Both Zarya's ult, Zenyatta ults going off left and right. A Reinhardt gets the Ana ult, and you're all just fighting tooth and nail. And then when the dust settles and the last man standing is someone on your team, it's the ultimate gratification. And they are actual fights, you know, these battles that can last several minutes at a time without someone dying. You never know which way it's gonna go. It's a constant struggle. You don't know what's gonna happen next. Who's gonna ult, who's gonna use this ability when, who's gonna counter that ability with what other ability. It's this cascade of super intense events and attacks and moments of exhilaration and fear and triumph and whoa, did that really just fucking happen? That really did just fucking happen. Which is different from many other shooters where really the person who aims down sight first is usually gonna be the winner of the fight, if you can even call it that, because the fight itself never lasts more than a few seconds and it doesn't usually involve all 6 people from each team fucking coming together in one clusterfuck orgy of combat and violence. People die so quickly, there aren't time for counters or strategic moves to buy time or change the tide of battle. It's just who saw who first a lot of the time, you know what I mean? You're never able to save your friend's life somehow. It almost always just boils down to positioning and who saw who first. It comes down to which team can out DPS the other team faster. The only real combat experience there is point and fucking shoot, and then it's over in less than a second. There isn't the same kind of sustained stimulation that Overwatch has going on. If you look at a real sport like soccer or basketball, these games are fun to play in real life, and they aren't only fun when you score. Now granted, scoring is probably the most fun part, but it's not the only part. You still have a lot of fun passing, defending, setting up plays. Other games are, I would argue, are focusing so much on maximizing the amount of killing people that you get to do that they end up neglecting a lot of the experience-driven gameplay. The kind of teamwork, strategy, and tactics you develop in deploying this game, you don't really get to do that in other arena shooters. Overwatch is like the equivalent of a basketball game, while many other arena shooters often just feel like you're taking turns making free throws. You know what I mean? They skip the struggle and they just make the kill so easy. A lot of these other arena shooters just feel like glorified games of hide and seek. There's no actual fight. Overwatch gives you that real FPS fight that I think a lot of us were longing for. And these are the reasons that I feel like this game has taken off the way it has. Nobody saw it coming. I didn't know anything about it before it released. I didn't even play the beta. I wasn't paying attention to it, but it has become one of my favorite games. And I apologize if I sound like a fanboy. Trust me, if some shady shit goes down with microtransactions or whatever, I'll be the first one sticking the shiv in, okay? But so far the DLC's been free. I enjoyed the Halloween update. There is a strain of toxicity in the Overwatch community that is, as far as I can tell, a lot worse than any other games community. I've made a lot of good friends on Overwatch, but some of the people I've met on this game, it like baffles me that they're even real. They are just such toxic, shameless douchebags. And it gets worse the closer you get to the top 500. I say this as someone who's in the top 500. The people that are really good at this game, not all of them, but most of them are just terrible, terrible people. And if you do play this game, never join a stranger's party in competitive. Just don't do it. It's never, whatever little bit of teamwork and communication you think is going to aid you in the game. First of all, nobody really communicates that much, even when you're in the same party. Secondly, it's not worth the whining you're going to have to listen to and the abuse they're going to send your way, because nobody ever, it's never their fault. You know what I mean? They always single out, they always look, oh, which teammate was it? Was it all these teammates? It's never, nobody ever says, oh, it's my fault. I say it. I wish that the fucking quick chat wheel had a sorry button. I'd say sorry all the time, okay? But nobody else, past a certain point in competitive, at the high levels of skill in this game, nobody, it's never their fault, and they will hate you. I mean, their self-worth and the self-worth of others is so defined by how well they do in the match that they will hate you. I mean, really hate. The amount of sheer hatred, it's just like bizarre. They will really fucking hate you if you're not lighting up that kill feed or doing what they want you to do. And so, quick play, you know, hang out in voice chat, make friends. At competitive, especially after the 3,000 mark, don't join strangers' parties. Don't play with someone unless you know them well. It's not the entire community. There are a lot of great, nice people that play this game. I've made a lot of good friends on this game. But at a certain point in competitive, there is a strain of toxicity that is just not worth engaging with on any level whatsoever. And that is my biggest criticism of this game. And it's not even of the game. It's just that for whatever reason, this game attracts some of the worst people that I didn't even think could really exist. But they're there, and they're in the top 500 in Overwatch, I guarantee it. So stay away from those motherfuckers if you play this game. Don't join strangers' parties. And I think Blizzard should do more to crack down on toxic-ass teammates fucking sending hate mail to every single one of their teammates, when really it's their fucking fault, okay? Okay, so yeah, that sums up my thoughts on Overwatch, why this new IP has been able to explode onto the scene the way it has. The For the Win query of the day is, do you like Overwatch? Why or why not? Please remember to rate. Thanks for watching. This is B Dobbins, signing out.
Play of the match.